Hey guys, in today's video, you'll meet Alaric Vaughn, a mechanic who died for nearly 20 minutes while praying alone in church, and came back with a shocking message about the mark of the beast and spiritual control of the world. What he saw on the other side will give you goosebumps. So leave a like, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and comment below which city you are watching. This story needs to be heard. My name is Alaric Vaughn, and for many years of my life I was just another name among so many. An ordinary man, living an ordinary life, in the small town of Whetstone, Indiana. If you passed me on the street, you might not notice me. I'm that guy with calloused hands, grease-stained clothes, and a shy smile that only appears when I'm with my wife or children. I'm a mechanic. And that night, March 14th, 2016, I had finished an exhausting shift at the workshop. I was supposed to go straight home. My wife Janine, I was preparing dinner, and my youngest son wanted me to watch the school band practice. But something inside me pulled me. I can't explain. I felt uneasy, as if the world was about to fall apart and I needed silence. A place where God could hear me, or maybe where I could finally hear Him. I drove to Covenant Holiness Church, the small wooden chapel where I was baptized at 13 years old. It was empty as I imagined. I parked my truck, got in, took off my cap, and walked down the aisle. I sat alone in the first pew, looking at the cross above the pulpit. "Sir," I began, almost voiceless. "I don't know what's wrong, but something is. I can feel it." I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. And that's when everything changed. The sound of the world, the faint hum of lamps, the creaking of wooden benches, vanished. The air felt different, denser, smoother, as if time had suspended its breath for an instant. My body became light and at the same time, distant. I opened my eyes, but I no longer saw the church. I was surrounded by light, not a light that hurt or dazzled. Was hot, golden, alive, as if love itself had color and temperature. And at the center of it all, there was somebody, or something, a presence. It was there at that moment that my life stopped being ordinary, and it would never be the same again. I didn't walk. I floated. I didn't feel my body like I used to, but I was still me. There was consciousness, memory, emotion. Everything around me was light, but not an empty light. It was a place, a space that seemed to have no end, and at the same time embraced me as if it were made just for me. No words can explain what I saw there. There were shapes, yes, structures that seemed made of sound and brightness like ethereal cathedrals, but it was more than beauty. There was life at all. The colors breathed, silence spoke, and I felt something I had never felt anywhere on Earth, plenitude total. Suddenly I realized that I wasn't alone. The light around me gently condensed into a shape that I cannot accurately describe. It was neither man nor woman, neither old nor young. Was presence. An essence so deep that my tears began to fall before any words were even spoken. And then, she said, "Alaric." My name, pronounced with so much tenderness that I felt my spiritual heart break. It was as if that voice had known me since before I took my first breath. Not as a heavenly archive, but as someone who was always there for me, even when I thought I was alone. "You sought answers, and now you will. See beyond the veil." She didn't use a mouth. The words appeared inside me, but they were more real than any sound I've ever heard. I tried to speak, but I couldn't form questions. I just cried. I felt completely naked in front of that presence. Not physically, but in my soul. My mistakes, my fears, my doubts. Everything was there, exposed, and yet I felt loved. "You're not dead, Alaric, but you're not as alive as you were before either. There are things you need to see, warnings you need to take." The light around started to change. The heat subsided. I realized that we were moving, or that the place around us was being transformed. The softness of paradise began to give way to a strange sensation, as if something was wrong. "Get ready," said the voice, "because what you will see, many do not want to see." And then, like a cloth being pulled back, the light was snatched away, and I saw the other side of faith. What came next was like falling from paradise onto a dark stage. I found myself in a dark space, but it wasn't a total absence of light. There were reflections, as if a great city was shining in the distance, hidden by fog. And then the vision opened, like a curtain being pulled back in a theater, revealing the most terrifying spectacle I have ever witnessed. I saw a stage, literally. Above him, well-dressed men and women with seductive smiles and eyes full of promises. Their voices were sweet, persuasive. They spoke of hope, faith, redemption. But inside them there was something wrong. The light I saw in the celestial realm did not exist there. It was as if they used the language of heaven to build towers of vanity. "Watch," said the voice. "They talk about me, but they don't know me." The words echoed inside me as the scenes became clearer. I saw religious leaders being applauded in packed arenas, their names on screens, their faces on products sold as anointed. I saw men in expensive jackets selling blessings, manipulating crowds with fear and the promise of salvation conditioned on donations. But they weren't just pastors or preachers. We rulers, global leaders who claimed to be defenders of freedom, but acted behind the scenes to control. Their meetings took place in luxurious rooms where maps and data flashed on digital dashboards. The people were cited as statistics, faith used as a tool of influence, fear as a lever of power. And then, I saw something that chilled me to the depths of my soul. Universal codes of conduct being signed, where faith was shaped, controlled, limited. It was like a global religion being manufactured, a mix of pleasant words, sacred images, and lies. "They shape faith as a product," said the divine presence, but true faith was never created by human hands. I saw crowds walking obediently, receiving signs, symbols, like invisible marks, in exchange for social acceptance and apparent safety, and few questioned it. Those who resisted were ridiculed, silenced. My soul cried, how was it possible that so many were blind? Because fear, Alaric, is more effective than prison. Those words stuck with me. The fear, the most powerful weapon, and whoever controlled fear, controlled the people. And I hadn't seen the worst of it yet. The vision changed once again. This time, I was above. A city, maybe it was New York, or maybe it was something even bigger, more advanced, more disconnected from humanity. Everything was technological, automated. Towers with giant screens transmitted messages of hope, happiness, order. But something about that perfection made me uneasy. Was free. There was no warmth, no compassion. Everything worked, but no lived. I saw people walking through the streets with passive faces as if they were drugged by a false peace. They wore devices on their wrists, which glowed with small codes. When someone tried to say something that went against the system, even in the name of faith, their signal was deactivated. I saw a man fall to his knees trying to pray, but his voice was drowned out by a deafening sound coming from the speakers. Stay aligned. Faith is universal. Rebellion is disease. This, said the divine presence beside me, is the result of the dilution of the sacred. I was silent, but inside I was screaming. I saw churches, or what was left of them, remodeled as centers of spiritual well-being, where there were no more Bibles, no crosses, no genuine prayers. There were screens with inspiring phrases, holograms of celestial figures reciting mantras, and leaders trained to lead emotions, not to shepherd hearts. Everything seemed positive, beautiful, but empty. And then I saw something even more terrible. I saw those who did not accept the system. Sincere Christians, faithful Muslims, Orthodox Jews, spiritual seekers who still believed in a living and personal God. They were not dead, nor imprisoned, were digitally isolated, invisible to society, as if they had been deleted from modern reality. They lived in the shadows in small, hidden communities, sustaining their faith with tears, with courage, with true love. These, said the voice, are the ones who keep the flame burning. They are persecuted not for threatening the system, but for expose the lie with your authentic faith. That's when I realized the most effective prison is not made of iron, it is one of acceptance. The invisible system did not need to prohibit faith. All you had to do was redesign it until no one wanted the original anymore. My soul burned. I wanted to do something, scream, run up to those people and say, "You forgot the true God. He's not in this theater." But I still couldn't act, because the visions were far from over. After all that, the control, the silence of true faith, the manipulation wrapped in heavenly veneer, I felt crushed. But the divine presence, which until then had guided me, in silence spoke again. All is not lost, Alaric. There are places where the light still burns. The shadows around me began to recede, and before me, a new scenery appeared. There were no screens, no glowing towers, just dry land, houses of clay, and an open sky like an altar of hope. It was a small village surrounded by deserts, but there was life there. And most importantly, there was faith. I saw a sick child, with a high fever, in his mother's arms. She was shaking and her mother's eyes were full of tears. There were no doctors. There were no medications. Just a group of people kneeling around, praying fervently. And then, like a flame that explodes in a dark field, the healing happened. The child stopped shaking. His eyes opened, smiled. There was no denying it. It was a miracle. In places, forgotten by the system, it is where I am still sought with my whole heart, said the voice. I saw another scenario. A community without access to food, in the midst of drought. A man knelt before a small basket of dried bread and said, "Lord, multiply as you did before." He did not pray for vanity or spectacle, prayed hungry and faith, and the loaves multiplied. I saw. People ate. They laughed. They sang. Next, I saw a blind woman being touched by another, a young man with his eyes shining like the sky I saw at the beginning of my journey. He didn't scream. I didn't do shows. It just said, "His will be done." And she saw. Tears ran down my face. These miracles, the presence explained, are not exclusive. They are available to everyone, but they only manifest where there is true surrender, where faith was not shaped by fear nor by profit, but by love. It was then that I realized how far we had gone. Miracles still happened, not where the fame of faith shone, but where hearts were broken and pure. And before I could absorb that hope, the scene changed once again. "Now," said the presence, with new seriousness, "you will see the greatest enemy of faith." My spiritual heart trembled. I knew what was coming next. The soft light of the forgotten lands disappeared, and with it, the comforting warmth. Now, I found myself in a place that was not physical, but that we all inhabit without realizing it, the inside of human fear. It was like walking through a maze made of broken mirrors. In every reflection, I saw familiar faces, men and women from all over the world, paralyzed, staring at something they couldn't see but that dominated them completely. And then I heard the words, "Fear doesn't have to be real to control. It just needs to be believed." I saw people watching the news. The content was always the same. Imminent war, economic crises, new diseases, invisible threats. But the faces that conveyed the messages did so with calm, confident smiles like shepherds leading their flock into the corral. Peace was promised, but only for those who obeyed without question. I saw children growing up afraid of the future. I saw young people giving up on their dreams for fear of failure. I saw old people locking themselves in their houses, afraid of death. And I saw believers losing faith, not due to lack of evidence, but due to excessive panic. They did not deny their faith, explained the presence at my side. They silenced her out of fear. It was then that I realized something terrifying. The same fear that prevents a man from raising his hand against his brother is also used to prevent him from raise a voice against a lie. I saw churches remaining silent in the face of injustice, afraid of being canceled, persecuted, demonetized, excluded. I saw pastors adapting sermons to please. I saw parents forbidding their children from talking about God in schools, all out of fear. And this fear was not accidental, was calculated, cultivated, injected, a subtle but constant spiritual programming. I saw an invisible panel above the world where words like security, order, progress shone. But they were all linked to the same thread, the fear of loss. They accepted the shackles, said the voice, believing it was protection. My spiritual knees gave out. How to fight against something you can't see, how to free a people who don't realize they are trapped. With faith, said the presence, true faith, faith that does not depend on signs or guarantees, faith that is born in darkness but rejects being consumed by it. I was shaking, but something inside me started to change. A spark, a fire. Because even there, in the maze of fear, faith could still burn. After walking through the dark halls of fear, I saw something that reignited my soul. There, on the edges of the system, far from the cameras, the stages, and the spirit-empty cathedrals, there existed a people, a remnant. Men and women who refused to bow to fear. They had no great temples, no technological resources, no applause. Their meetings took place in simple houses, in caves, forests, and hidden cellars. But when they prayed, the sky responded. I saw a meeting in an abandoned warehouse, with candles flickering in glass jars. A hoarse-voiced man read a passage of scripture with tears in his eyes, while a woman on the other side of the circle raised her hands and began to sing. It was not a rehearsed praise. It was a cry of the soul, a raw, torn sound, but powerful. And, at that moment, the divine presence manifested itself, not as a spectacle but as a fire inside each one of them. I saw young people who had left their homes to follow the true faith, even though they were rejected by their own families. I saw elderly people who lost everything except hope. I saw mothers teaching their children to pray, knowing that the next generation would need a stronger faith than the world had ever known. These are the unshakable ones, said the voice beside me. They lost everything, except what matters. And there was something about them that touched me deeply. None of them considered themselves heroes. They did not fight for glory, nor for visibility. They fought because they knew that without truth the soul dies even in a living body. I saw healings happen in silence. I saw visions being given in dreams. I saw supplies arriving without explanation, bags of rice, bottles of water, firewood, medicines, as if the heavens were directly supporting them. These people did not follow a platform religion. They followed a real relationship with God. They are few, said the presence, but they are like torches in the darkness. Each of them illuminates much more than they imagine. And then I looked at myself. Would I have the courage to be like them? The answer was still being shaped within me. But one thing I knew, the world would need them, and many others, to survive what is coming. The images around me stopped for a moment. It was as if the sky itself had been holding its breath, waiting for something. The divine presence once again manifested itself before me, not as before in a soft and enveloping way, but now with intense authority, almost unbearable. It wasn't a threat. It was the naked, raw truth, irrefutable. You saw it, Alaric. Now you need to choose. Those words echoed inside me like thunder in an empty cave. Choose what? I asked, even though I knew the answer was already burning in my chest. Submission or courage? At that moment I understood. This was not just a revelation for me to keep. It was not a symbolic vision. It was a calling, a mission, a responsibility. And then the presence took me to a familiar place. I saw my church, but not like I left it that night. It was full of people, men, women, young and old. Many I knew, others I never saw. They were silent, looking at the altar, where I myself was standing. "You will have to speak," said the voice, "even when your voice shakes." I found myself facing skeptical looks, some confused, some touched. I saw my son Darren at the back of the church with teary eyes as if something inside him had finally broken. But I also saw those who walked away, those who shook their heads, indignant, as if the truth were too offensive to accept. "You will be rejected," warned the presence. "But it will also be an instrument of liberation." My soul writhed. I just wanted to go back to my simple life, my workshop, my house, my peaceful Sundays. I never asked to be a spokesperson for spiritual views. I never wanted to carry this weight. But I knew that if I kept quiet, my life would never make sense again. "Fear not men," said the voice. "Fear living without purpose. Fear burying the light I have shown you." It was at that moment that I knelt down, not by choice. My spirit, prostrated, broken, knew, surrendered. "I accept," I murmured. "Even though I'm scared, even though I don't know how, I accept it." And at that moment, the presence smiled, not with lips, but with light. And then, one last thing was shown to me, a seal, a flame, a name that burned not in fire, but in glory, freedom in Christ. That was the shield, the calling, the way. And it would start as soon as I woke up. The light around me began to vibrate, as if time itself was collapsing, pulling my spirit back into a reality that no longer seemed to belong to me. The sound of something distant echoed, a constant beep, muffled voices, running footsteps. Everything seemed to come from far away, until it came from within. My spiritual eyes closed, and when they opened, there was pain, heaviness, and flesh. I was back. Fluorescent lights, masks, needles, hospital machinery, and a deep pain in my chest, as if thunder had struck me. From the inside, I heard a muffled scream. "He's back!" My head lolled to the side, and there it was, Janine, my wife, with her face red, her hands shaking, and her eyes fixed on me. At his side, my youngest son, clutching a small crucifix tightly. "Alaric?" she whispered. I blinked slowly. I wanted to speak, but my throat was fire. My muscles felt like stone. But at that moment, a tear fell from my eyes. It was all I could give. And it was enough for her to start crying for real, with relief, with shock, with faith. Later, I learned that my heart had stopped 19 minutes and 47 seconds. Doctors said my survival was unlikely, and my return a miracle that science cannot fully explain. I smiled inside. Because you knew. That night, Pastor Marin Clay came to visit me. He sat next to me, held my hand, and said, "There's something different about you, Brother Vaughn. Like, you've been through something that can't be explained." I looked at him. I saw in his eyes a man who was still searching for the truth, but also someone wrapped in the structure that I had seen distorted in the visions. He wasn't a villain, but maybe a prisoner of the system. "Pastor," I said in a weak voice, "when I get out of here, I need to talk to the church." He frowned. "About what?" I took a deep breath. The pain was great, but the urgency was greater. "About what's real, about what I've seen, about what's coming." He stared at me for a few seconds, and then he just nodded. I knew that from that moment on, my life would never be ordinary again. And more than that, I didn't want it to be. It took me weeks to recover. Each day in the hospital felt like a reminder that I had died and come back, but more than that, it felt like I had born again. Not figuratively, but viscerally. I saw the world differently. People felt differently. Listened to God inside the silence. When I finally got up and returned to the church, everything looked the same on the outside. The worn pews, the wooden pulpit, the faded stained glass windows. But my heart was beating with a different frequency. I no longer saw structures. I saw destinations, souls, wounded hearts that didn't yet know they were sleeping. The following Sunday, Pastor Marin gave me the microphone. He just said, "Brother Alaric has something to say, something heaven has shown him." The temple was silent. I climbed the steps with my legs still weak, but my spirit firm as stone. I looked at that congregation, my people, my friends, my family, and took a deep breath. I died, I began, and I came back. But what I bring here is not just a testimony, it is an alert and a promise. I shared everything, the visions, the words of the divine presence, invisible systems, manipulative leaders, the diluted truths, the forgotten miracles, the silent resistance. I didn't scream, I didn't accuse, but I didn't soften either. And what I saw on their faces was impact. Some were crying, others lowered their eyes. A few, visibly uncomfortable, left before I finished. But many, they stayed, and they listened, with the soul. In the end, he just said, "The world is being molded to appear safe, modern, and spiritual. But true faith, my brothers, it requires courage. Faith is choice. It is surrender. It is resistance. Do not be deceived by the shine that covers the absence of God. Seek the truth, read the scriptures, pray, listen, and be ready. Because the time to wake up has arrived." I left that pulpit with my heart at peace. Days later, my son Darren came into my room. He looked hesitant. He sat on the edge of the bed and remained silent for a while. Then he said, "Dad, I want to know more about what you saw." And in that moment, I understood. The mission had begun. It wasn't saving the world, was wake up those who could still hear. And if my experience, my pain, my death, and my return served to awaken even a single soul, then it was all worth it. My name is Alaric Vaughn, and I've been on the other side. And believe me, God still speaks. Miracles still exist. And the world needs your faith more than ever. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time,